Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm Lieutenant Tom Ruiz with Albuquerque Fire Rescue. Today we're here at Fire Station 5 to recognize District 6 City Councilor Pat Davis for his generous contributions to AFR in Stations 3, 5, and 11. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Fire Chief Paul Dow, and he's going to give us some more information about what's going on today.
All right, thank you, everybody, for coming today. Councilor Davis and I have regular conversations about, just public safety in general and the fire service and some of our needs. In those conversations, we talked about some of the areas we're trying to improve the department, whether it be cancer prevention and trying to help our firefighters reduce their exposure to cancer as well. And in that conversation, Councilor Davis recognized that we are trying to do our best we can to reduce the exposure to carcinogens to our firefighters. And in those conversations, we talked about washers and dryers in stations. Councilor Davis actually was the only city councilor that stepped up and said, you know what, I've got money, I'm going to put it forward to get washers and dryers in the stations in his district. So stations 5, 11, and station 3 now have washers and dryers for our firefighters. Hookups were some of the issues that we had in some of the older stations, but we're working through that process as well. We also talked about thermal imaging cameras. We've got a few rescues that we have in the city of Albuquerque that do have thermal imaging cameras, but none of them were in Councilor Davis's district. He also gave us the money so we could purchase thermal imaging cameras for our rescue so we can use those to search for victims inside of our fires. Battalion 2, which is behind me, is the battalion chief in the Southeast Heights. That truck was older, it needed to be replaced, and Councilor Davis again stepped up and gave us the funding so that we could purchase a new battalion chief vehicle. Obviously this one looks different than the other ones that you see. They were an SUV style, we've gone to a pickup truck style. The reason we did that is so we could isolate the bunker gear and some of the equipment from the chief that's in the cab of the vehicle. So again, they're not being exposed to those carcinogens as well. We're also working with Councilor Davis. He's actually helping us to purchase a outreach trailer. So when we go to different events, we'll be able to bring equipment and do a better job of community outreach for the community. So I cannot thank Councilor Davis enough. It's absolutely amazing what he's been able to do for our department. He's always an advocate for the fire service and trying to make sure that we have the necessary tools and equipment and training that the Albuquerque Fire Rescue needs. So Councilor Davis, thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, Chief. We appreciate you. We appreciate y'all. And let me just say, I appreciate the very kind words, and it's great. This is not something hard to support. But the reason we wanted to do this event today, as counselors, every 2 years, voters go to the bonds. They go to the elections, they vote on public safety bonds. Each city councilor has some discretionary money they can use to support projects and public safety projects in their own district. And so every part of the city is unique. But as Chief Dow said, when the new administration came in and we started to sit down and say, what can we do to support our firefighters? Where's the need best? It's really apparent when you spend time in Southeast, I've done a few ride-alongs, that these are not just some of the busiest stations in the city, they are some of the busiest stations in the country. And the firefighters who volunteer and sign up to work in these stations in this part of town do so knowing that they're putting themselves on the line more often, they're exposing themselves to carcinogens in our fires, they're getting out in the community a lot more often, they're not here at the station very much. And so it only makes sense that the firefighters who are busiest and putting themselves on the line deserve to have the tools and the protections that help them from bringing those carcinogens back to each other, and more importantly, taking them home to their families. And so it sounds like unsexy things to say we bought washers and dryers for our firefighters, but if you're a firefighter who spent 8 hours on a fire, covered in soot and God knows what else from a fire scene, the last thing you want to do is bring that back home to your family. And so the fire service under Chief Dow and his team are changing that dynamic, and we're putting in those tools so they can wash their equipment here, take care of those. We talked about thermal imaging cameras. Again, busiest stations in the city didn't have thermal imaging cameras for our turnout gears, and that means that when they're going to a fire, they're waiting on somebody else from another part of town to bring these cameras to look for folks that might be trapped. And we've seen that time and time again here in Southeast, most recently with apartment fires where we've had multiple people that may be inside, and our firefighters are running in with or without them. But making their job easier, limiting their time they have to be exposed there, making their ability to do that makes a lot more sense. And so then, when we did a ride-along and saw that the old Battalion 2 truck had more than 100,000 miles on it, tough miles, and riding around Los Santos for a little while in the Southeast, you realize how busy they are. And so we started that process, and so an unfortunate incident took that other unit out of commission a little earlier than we wanted, and so the fire department stepped up to fast track that. All that is said, those small investments in sort of making the quality of life and work quality for our firefighters better every day is exactly what we're trying to do in Albuquerque, to recruit and retain folks, to let them know that if they come to work for our city, we care about them. But the reason we want to do this as well is because on the ballot this November are new bonds. It includes money for public safety in my district and every city council district. And there are needs like this all across the city. And so we want people to know when they're voting yes on public safety bonds, that's coming back to things like keeping our firefighters safe, buying new equipment like this, cameras that might save you in your home. And those small sort of purchases of a couple of $1,000s for a camera or $60,000 or so for a new truck are not things that we usually budget for and ask the legislature for in the $1 million range. And so this is what we do in our neighborhoods to help our firefighters, to help our neighborhoods. And so we want voters to say yes to, because there's a lot more of this to do in a lot more stations with a lot more firefighters, and we're not even done here yet. And so I want to commend our firefighters. I want to commend IFF for stepping up and advocating for your health, for your safety, for your welfare for years, and for Chief Dow and his team for really stepping up with a list and saying, here's what we can do together. So thank you all for being here for that. So, Chief?
So cancer in the fire service is something it's a big push to try to reduce the cancer exposure and carcinogen exposure actually to our firefighters. Before, if they had a structure fire, they would come back and they would have t-shirts and pants and they would have carcinogens all over those. Most of our firefighters would just take them off, put them off to the side, and they'd have to take them home and wash them in the same washers and dryers they use with their family. And that was exposing their family to those carcinogens as well. We'd like them to wash that here at the station, remove all those carcinogens, and then you can take that equipment home. Plus, they had to transport in their own vehicle. It was just too much exposure for them. So a simple washer and dryer, like the counselor said, it's not that sexy purchase, but it actually makes a big difference in our firefighters and for them to not have to expose their families to those carcinogens. If you look at like Rio Rancho Fire Rescue has also purchased battalion chief vehicles for their department. So we had some conversations with them as well, and it seems the way the fire service is going. Again, it isolates that battalion chief from the carcinogens or potential carcinogens in the back of the truck. It could be on their equipment, it could be on other equipment that's carried in the back of the apparatus, and we just want to make sure that there's that barrier between them. Before, we had basically a plastic piece that was set up in between the back seat and the area where they carry the cargo, and that's just not going to be sufficient. We are incredibly grateful for all the support that we get from the city administration, from city councilors. They recognize the need that we have in the fire service to protect our firefighters better, and so we've made a lot of progress in the last year. We actually have, like I said, washers and dryers in some of our stations. We have new decontamination procedures that our firefighters follow on the fire ground itself. We're doing everything we possibly can. We're doing physicals on an annual basis now. It's a more detailed physical now for our firefighters. Every single year, firefighters are getting those. Plus, we've made interstitial spaces in our stations. So we're trying to isolate the apparatus bay from the living quarters of the stations. And a lot of other little things that we're doing, but we've had a lot of help from the city administration and, of course, our city council as well. It's made a big difference in our firefighters. They have a tough enough job as it is right now. They shouldn't have to worry about exposures to carcinogens. This is the 26th busiest fire department in the country, and Station 5 is one of the busiest in the country. Engine 11 just down the street is the 11th busiest engine company in the country. So their firefighters in the city of Albuquerque work extremely hard, and they shouldn't have to worry about that exposure to carcinogens. We're trying to bring all of our resources equally throughout the city of Albuquerque. So some of the stations have more challenges than others. They're just older buildings, so installing a washer and dryer is not as easy. This is a newer station, so we simply had to bring in the washer and dryer and we could hook it up right away. We've got older stations where you can't do that, so we're having to be creative, and it's costing a little bit more. We're gonna get there to where we have these washers and dryers in all of our stations. Same thing with the thermal imaging cameras. Until this administration started, we did not have thermal imaging cameras like you see here on all of our rescues. We've been able to push forward with that. We've had churches that have donated, Legacy Churches donating thermal imaging cameras for us. We had Councilor Borrego, and she purchased thermal imaging cameras for all of our stations on the west side, 18s, 21s, and 22s. and then we're just chipping away at it. Councilor Jones also purchased a thermal imaging camera for us over at Station 16 up in the Heights. So we just continue to chip away at it the best that we can. Like the councilor said, these are small items that are not typically budgeted for, but they're absolutely essential. You ask any one of my firefighters here, and it's going to really make a difference. If you're going inside that structure fire and having one of these cameras with you and not having one, that makes a difference in how fast you can find that victim and bring them out and save them.
And maybe, and Chief, I might add, just thinking about that, I mean, to sort of bring that in perspective, you know, the city, in the state of New Mexico and the city we're in hard financial times for a really long time. And often the first things to go out of that are the basic equipment needs. And you ask your firefighters to do more with old equipment, to keep it going and to do less, and one day we'll catch up. We're now turning a corner in a place where we have the opportunity to reinvest. We spend a lot of time talking about raises for our police officers, increasing their training. But we're doing that across the city, and particularly in public safety. And so it is about our firefighters, and we've got new lateral firefighter class. We've got new firefighters in the academy right now. We're bringing firefighters from across the Southwest to Albuquerque because they want to work here, but they're doing it because after years of being underpaid and the old administration that owed a lot of money to our firefighters for back pay, we've caught them up on back pay. We're now reinvesting in paying them an equitable, fair wage for the work they're doing. And we're trying to show them that we're investing in their safety. It wasn't something we did for a while, and we are, as sort of the chief said, we're catching up to station by station with those needs. And that's why that district level public safety discretionary dollars are so important, because the needs in Station 5 are very different. But as Councilor Borrego, Councilor Jones, every councilor is chipping in with the mayor to protect our firefighters and do that in those specialized needs. And that's why we want voters to say yes in November, because there's millions more that we have to do, one camera, one truck at a time. But we can't do any of that unless voters step up and support our firefighters this fall. And so we need them to do that as well.